Welcome back to Bills and Business, your go-to podcast for Texas legislation and business. I'm Laura Carr, co-founder of USLege, an AI-first legislative tracking platform designed to keep you ahead of the curve. Today, I'm joined by Representative Tom Oliverson. He represents Texas's 130th State House District in Harris County, and he's the chairman of the House Republican Caucus and a practicing anesthesiologist. He's played a key role in shaping healthcare policy here in Texas, and today we'll explore his journey from medicine to politics, his run for the speaker seat, his legislative priorities, and his vision to shape Texas's future. So for those who don't know your background, we do have a lot of legislators and lawmakers and people listening that do know you. But for those who don't, do you mind just sharing kind of how you got into the legislature from being in healthcare?
Well, so those are kind of two different stories. I got into the legislature because I felt like that was God calling me to serve my community, serve him by serving others, and sort of a process that happened. But the bottom line is that somebody who was a great inspiration to me, sort of impressed upon me the idea that if you don't like what you see in terms of the morals and ethics and behavior of elected officials, you have to be willing to sacrifice and stand up and be part of the solution. Otherwise, you really don't have the right to complain, because a lot of what you get is based on who's willing to drop whatever important thing they're doing and say, you know what, the future of our state, the future of our nation is important to me, and I'm willing to give something up of my own, what it belongs to me in order to do that. So it really was something I prayed about it a lot, and it just became very clear that that's what God wanted me to do. He wanted me to serve him by serving my community. And so I've always approached it as a mission field opportunity, as part of the reason why you were talking earlier about getting killed and getting wounded and stuff like that. I think if you're going to be a lawmaker, you have to have prodigiously thick skin and a very short memory, because people who are your enemies can suddenly become your allies. It just depends on what you're working on, and it's just the nature of the business. And so it's like, I've had people, even colleagues, throughout the speaker race, there were things that people said about me that were untrue and nasty. And I just don't choose to dwell on that, because I think it's counterproductive. And it's just you gotta have thick skin, right?
You know the game.
It is full contact, right? I mean, it is. There's no question that if you think MMA is violent, run for office and see what people actually say about you, and you'd be shocked. You didn't know you were that bad of a person until you ran for office, right?
Right.
It's the way it goes.
Sure.
So anyway, I am an anesthesiologist, and board certified. I am actually the third anesthesiologist, literally from the same group of 35 doctors in Harris County, to successfully run for office in the Texas legislature.
Oh.
So Kyle Janik is one of my former partners, and I think he's still practicing out in Lakeway now. But he, obviously served in the legislature and then was our HHS commissioner for a time. John Zerwas is another partner of mine. And then I'm the third. So I'm number 3, right? I don't know if there'll be a fourth, but we have, it's an interesting thing. I think, and Dr. Bonin and I talk about this a lot, I think doctors make good lawmakers because we're problem solvers. We're used to listening, gathering information, diagnosing, and then treating. And so I think we're good at policy because that's sort of our default mechanism of thinking, is to identify problems by gathering information and then choosing to act on those things.
In a scientific way.
In a very scientific way, right? So I think that's also really, really important, is like, show me the data.
Sure.
And I'm in my 5th term, just doing, what I can to make Texas a better place. You mentioned healthcare. I have championed in my 5 terms or 4 terms completed, 5th term starting now. I have championed a wide variety of things to try to help with healthcare costs. I'm a big believer in price transparency. I'm still waiting for the app that basically, for all the tech people that might be listening to there, if you really, really want to make it big in the world and make a lot of people really happy, create an app that functions very much like a Yelp or an Edmunds that essentially allows people to search for discounted healthcare prices for services that they need to get. Doctor says, I need to get an MRI. Well, there's an app for that, right? But there's not really an app for that. But if there was, the only way to really lower healthcare costs in this country is to get consumers of healthcare to think like they're actually consumers of any other product out there.
Sure.
Healthcare is the only sector of our economy where you don't actually know the cost of the goods and services you're purchasing at the time of purchase. Imagine if you went into a car dealership and you said, okay, I'm going to buy this car. And the dealership says to take it home and you drive it. And then 30 days later, you get a bill in the mail and you find out how much the car costs. And you had no idea what it was going to cost up front.
We just had the Texas Association of Health Plans on. Jamie didn't say, and she was saying just that exact stat.
I mean, it's absurd. It's really absurd. Now, healthcare is complicated. And there's a lot of middlemen and middle women in healthcare in terms of barriers between providers and patients. So the problem is, like, nobody buys a car with insurance. And so you have all of these dysfunctional incentives that are serving as basically barriers to consumers actually shopping, because they're a lot of times they're not using their dollars. They've met their deductible. They don't care. They just go wherever the doctor tells them. They get whatever they're told to get. And the doctors are not ever given any information about price because, you know, it's the latest, greatest thing and you want to live, don't you?
Oh, yeah.
And so it's like there's a complete fiscal disconnect for healthcare, except with the exception of cash pay, like direct primary care and things like that, or when you haven't met your deductible. And then you care a lot more about what things cost because you're like, well, it's coming out of my pocket, you know.
So you had some good ideas. Why don't you start a startup? Have you thought about that? A HealthTech?
I don't. Well, I mean, and I will just say, like, I'm certainly willing to be the silent partner or whatever, the idea guy, but I do believe that I don't have that business background that I feel confident like your husband that I could just, I'm start a startup, you know, and I know how, you know, I'm not a finance guy, I'm not a business guy, sure. I'm a policy maker.
Domain expertise. That's where I come in on ours.
Domain
right?
expertise. That's going to be my contribution, is the expertise.
That's the helpful, you know, engineers don't know what to build unless you direct them.
So we've done, in the sessions that I've been here, we eliminated surprise medical billing in Texas.
Okay.
In 2019, that was Senator Hancock and myself working together. And I would say still to this day, that is probably in the healthcare world, that is my greatest contribution to state law and the thing I'm most proud of, because we actually took a problem and completely eliminated it almost overnight. And our idea was so well thought out and so good that the federal No Surprises Act is modeled after the Texas law.
Wow.
Congressman Brady took our law that Senator Hancock and I passed together to Congress and gave it to Chairman Neal, and it became the Brady-Neal Compromise that broke the stalemate, and that is the No Surprises Act. So
that's amazing.
It's the only time that I can actually say that I had a hand in creating federal law, because I had a policy. I found somebody in the Senate that wanted to work with me, and we worked together. We didn't always see eye to eye, but that's the process, and you work it out, and we ended up with something that has withstood the test of time, that is very good policy by anybody's standard. That's also federal law.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And are you still practicing?
I am. I'm actually, believe it or not, today is HCA Day at the Capitol.
Okay.
Right? I am actually the chief of anesthesia at an HCA hospital in my district.
And how on earth did you do that while running for speaker? And you have legislative session going on. What is your schedule like to be able to accommodate that?
It is a one day at a time, right? I think, you know, that's something I learned a long time ago, but sometimes you just have to break things down into the days, and you have to just look at the day ahead and what the calendar is and move that direction. I mean, now, I'm not saying don't plan, right? You need to plan, but I mean, sometimes you really have to, in order to avoid being overwhelmed in the busyness of your day, you just have to take things a day at a time, an hour at a time, a minute at a time. Just focus on the present with one eye towards what's the next thing coming up, but be focused on the present and just, that doesn't leave a lot of time to contemplate the past, right? You just keep moving forward.
Absolutely.
And that's kind of how you do it, right? I think also because this is not something that I decided to do because I just always wanted to be a state official, but this was something I felt like God was calling to me to do. I believe in following in His will. He's equipped me and given me the patience and the grace and the time and the, sympathetic partners in my business and everything to be able to pull it all together and get it done. Yeah. And I still get to do family stuff too, so it's fun.
And you're 3 hours from here, roughly?
Yeah, it's about 2.5. Depends on how fast I drive.
Well,
have you ever talked on this podcast about the little trickery? It's not really trickery, but in state law where it talks about law enforcement can't really impede a state official to or from the Capitol. And that gets interpreted to, I can drive as fast as I want.
Is that true?
I will say that I think there are limits to reality. And I think if you ask the average state trooper, they would say, listen, if you're driving 100 miles an hour, I'm pulling you over. And I don't care if you have SO plates or not. I'm telling you to slow down.
What's the fastest you've ever gone?
I can't say.
But it's not. I used
to have so I drive an F-250.
Okay.
But I did used to have a little Mercedes convertible, was one of those ones that had the big bi-turbo, their AMG engine and everything. So that thing can go pretty fast.
Very cool. So do you ever do round trip days up here and then go back home?
Yes, during interim, I do that all the time. If you just have to come up here for the day, the only time I don't want to offend anyone who's from Austin and maybe listening to this, but my home's in Cypress and my family's in Cypress, and I really am a family guy, and I don't really want to be up here any more than what I have to be up here. So it's like if I'm just here for the day, I'm not the guy that comes in the night before and tries to find 3 happy hours and a dinner and then an after party and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. There are members like that in the legislature. I am not one of them. I want to get my work done, do my policy, go home. And so I'll come up for the day a lot, and I'll leave when I'm done.
Okay.
Zoom has actually been a revelation because, when I first joined the legislature, there wasn't a whole lot of this. And it wasn't that long ago. It was 2017. There was not a whole lot of meetings by video conference.
Sure.
So you physically had to be here, or they had to come to you, and you had to be in your district office. And it was all face-to-face. But now I think people are still even though we're out of the pandemic, people are like, well, can we just do a Zoom, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And so,
I'm a big fan.
If all you're trying to do is exchange information, then that works too.
What's a typical week like for you, the height of session, say a month from now?
Yeah, so a month from now, it probably looks like I'm rolling in Sunday evening. I'm going to my meeting with the Texas Conservative Coalition, TCC, which is sort of all my friends and co-laborers. And, we're talking policy and what's on the calendar and all that kind of stuff. And then I'm getting up Monday morning and I'm coming to the Capitol. We usually have a mix of committees. Again, this is all new for me. I kind of got sent back to square one. It's like if you're playing Monopoly, I hit the go back, to the go whatever, or Chutes and Ladders or whatever.
You collect 200.
Yeah, I didn't collect 200, but I got sent back to the beginning. Okay. And so everything's new to me this session. But normally you're in committee in the morning, and then you go on the floor and you have a calendar and you pass bills, and then you go back to committee afterwards. And when I was a committee chair, I think the latest our committee in insurance ever went was 10 o'clock at night.
Oh, that's not bad.
And we do a lot of bills. Insurance gets a lot of bills, but I try to be very methodical, very focused. When witnesses come up, we have a timer.
Right.
And so we we worked through the agenda, and I think, I'm very proud of the fact that our committee always heard a lot of bills, worked through the policy, good questions, very diligent work. But we didn't just hang out all day and all night and, let one bill just sort of consume the entirety of our day. Now, there's some committees like State Affairs or Pub Ed where you just can't avoid that.
I staffed State Affairs on the Senate side.
And you just can't, yeah.
You can't. It was very fun, though. But the 2-3 a.m. meetings I'm a practicing physician, and I certainly have stayed up all night in my career on many an occasion, taking care of sick patients, but I don't just look forward to that. It's just part of the job.
I'm kind of let's see, be up all night, not be up all night. How about we opt for not be up all night?
Yep. Totally.
Yeah, still get the important work done.
So going back to kind of your time and all these things, into the speaker, the timing of that was also just fascinating as I watched, the year play out. What made you run for speaker? I mean, and I have to say as a disclaimer, and I think a lot of people don't realize this, I was one of the people who was there at the very beginning of Dave Phelan's speakership and believed very strongly that he was the right guy to take over for Dennis Bonnen. I think a lot of us felt like Dennis had done a really good job managing the House, and especially coming off of my first session with Joe Strauss, I felt like Dennis was more conservative, and I felt like he had a better relationship with the Senate, and I felt like the House was being seen and being respected, and I was devastated, when he wasn't able to continue as Speaker, and I think we all felt like Dave was the next guy. Mm-hmm. And I think, to his credit, I think he, from a policy perspective, I think Speaker Phelan achieved some great policy wins. I'm just going to say, I think impeachment was a terrible mistake. Mm-hmm. I was not there, and that was going to be known ahead of time. I mean, that was well known that my son was graduating from high school that weekend, and that, I'm sorry that this bomb drops from outer space like 72 hours before you actually decide to do it, but I'm not missing a once-in-a-lifetime event with my oldest child. Yeah, true.
And just wasn't going to do it. And I also just, wasn't going to let them vote for me in my absence, having not heard the conversation, because it clearly was not uncontroversial.
Right.
And I felt like there were some decisions that were made that were unrecoverable errors. My dad's a former Air Force pilot, and one of the things I learned growing up is that sometimes in flying, you can make a mistake that is unrecoverable. And no matter what you do from that point forward, you're never going to get control of that airplane again. And I think that, unfortunately, that's what happened. And I didn't realize it at the time. I was really unhappy about the impeachment thing. And I was really unhappy about the fact that we couldn't get to a resolution on school choice. And I was willing to sort of sit there quietly and bite my tongue, because I thought maybe there's something that people don't know and it's going to be okay. And clearly it wasn't. I mean, the primaries were brutal to the Speaker's team.
Sure.
And I think that was a clear indication to me that my worst fears were realized and that we had to have a change. It was an unrecoverable error. It was a flat, I think one of the ones that your pilots would recognize is that airplanes can get into what's called a flat spin. And you can't get out of that. My dad flew F-Force in the Air Force, and there were certain things you could do in that plane that if you pushed that plane in a certain direction, did the wrong thing, you were going to crash no matter what. And you may not even be able to punch out.
Wow.
And so, I felt like that's what happened. And so I felt like somebody had to stand up and say, okay, this has gone as far as it can go. We have to put forward another idea. And I think my hope was that would be recognized and that, people would say, yeah, okay. And I think there were a lot of people that said, yay, finally, especially people outside the building were like, yay, finally somebody's listening to us. I've always felt that there's been this secret tension, maybe some people know about it, some don't, in the House, where people feel like it's the House against the world. Once you're in that chamber, it's like everybody doesn't like us and screw everybody outside of this building. And I just really think that's a self-destructive, counterproductive philosophy, right? I want the House to be seen with the same level of competence, respect, and willingness to work with grassroots and listen to the people of Texas, as I think the Senate gets a lot of credit for. And
people were angry.
And the people were mad. And so, I felt like somebody had to stand up and say something, and I didn't see anybody else that was willing to do it. And I just said, look, I didn't come here to be served. I came here to serve. And if it all falls apart on me and ends tomorrow, I'll be okay with that. At least I had the courage to stand up and try.
And you were the first person to put your hat in the ring.
And I was.
Right?
And I will tell you, I articulated a very simple platform based on some things that I thought were real obvious. And my belief in my fellows was rewarded, because it wasn't very long after that a group of lawmakers came together and they put out the contract with Texas, which, quite frankly, took every idea that I had said, this is my platform, this is what's important. And they took it and ran with it, And I would say, if you look at some of the things that Speaker Burrows has done, he has embraced a lot of the things that we've talked about as reforms. So in some respects, I may have lost, but I also felt like I won. We did reform the House. We did get some things. We didn't get everything we wanted. Nobody ever does in life. But I do feel like we moved the needle at the end of the day. And the movement is growing, right? There is a strong desire to reform.
Oh, absolutely. There's been a huge shakeup. Mm-hmm. So what was your kind of thought with the timing as well of everything? When the time that you came out and announced, and then, I think, when did others start announcing? Was it 4 months
Well,
ago?
actually, so Shelby Slauson
Yes.
announced on the same day as when we impeached Ken Paxton a year earlier. And for her, that was a very momentous day. She was there on the chamber, saw it play out. And you can go back and look at her statement on it. She talks a lot about that. I just felt like at the time, I didn't just sort of say, hey, I want to do it, or, somebody put you up to it or whatever. I really thought about it. But I think the main thing is I was searching for answers as to what is the lesson of the primaries here. Mm-hmm. It was the most prodigious loss I had ever seen in my career of Republicans in the primary, many of whom I fought really hard to try to keep, because you're my friends, right?
Sure.
Colleagues. It's a tough thing to lose somebody that you work with. And then I learned very quickly that people come, people go. That's the nature. And so new people come in, you work with them. Sometimes they end up being better than the people that preceded them, right? It's just the way it goes. But I felt like the grassroots were trying to tell us something. And I felt like what they were trying to say is that we're not happy with the status quo anymore. We're begging for change. And the timing to me was important. Again, I felt like the House needed to respond with a message of reform. And I felt like it needed to be somebody who was credible. I felt like the first person out of the gate had to be somebody that would be seen as somebody who could actually win, who could actually do it, who had some respect in the chamber, who had a track record of working with everybody. I have a very bipartisan track record.
I was going to mention that. Absolutely.
So people would say, well, why are you settling against banning Democrat chairs? And you work with Democrats all the time. And I'm like, look, we are literally like the last man standing in the states in terms of having this bipartisan chair arrangement. And we're not setting the example. We're sort of at the tail end of history on that. And it's dysfunctional. And as the parties have moved farther apart, and the middle, the mushy middle has kind of winnowed out and doesn't really exist anymore, it becomes harder and harder to not find yourself in situations where you're stepping all over each other in a shared leadership thing. So anyway, the timing for me really had everything to do with the fact that I felt like somebody had to stand up, and it had to be somebody credible, and it was like, one of those "here I am, send me, Lord" kind of things, where I was willing to make that sacrifice and come what may, give it my best shot.
So the lieutenant governor has come out and said that we're the only state where the Democrats elect the speaker. Do you agree with that statement?
I think the reality is that you have a chamber of 150 people who vote.
Right.
And you need 76 to win. And it doesn't matter where the 76 come from.
Right.
At the end of the day, that's the only vote that matters. Now, we've had meetings before the meetings, and people have been critical, and we've had caucus meetings, and obviously people know that didn't play out because we had a caucus nominee and he didn't win. But at the end of the day, I want to be really clear about the fact that the only vote that matters for Speaker is the vote that you take on the House floor on day one. And Dustin Burrows won the vote fair and square. He did. And the majority of the people that voted for him, to the lieutenant governor's point, were Democrats. But he is the duly elected Speaker of the Texas House.
Absolutely. How much time on the back end was it negotiating with your peers to get to this final vote here?
Well, I mean, I'm just going to be honest. Our caucus is still healing. We were very divided last year. It was really hard. And there were those that like the status quo and just want to keep business as usual going. And then there were those that really want to change. And it kind of rocked us to our core. And I think as a family of Republicans, we're still processing that and still working through that. You don't have the kind of seismic shift that we had in terms of people losing. I mean, this wasn't a case where you had 25 people that retired.
Right.
You had a ton of people and quite a few chairmen that were just flat out defeated. And not by 100 votes here and 100 votes there, but by solid margins.
Right.
And so we're still working through all that. I mean, the whole process, of getting to the point to where we actually chose our speaker was painful, I think, for all Republicans, regardless of who you were supporting. Both sides felt like they were doing the right thing, and both sides felt like they were being attacked for doing what they thought was right. And I do think that, I don't think we're at a steady state at this point in terms of what does the new House look like, right? When Dave Phelan became Speaker of the House, he came in, and by that time, essentially, everybody had put their sword away and the hatchets were buried. And, people, they may not have all been on Team Phelan, but it was no question that the majority was with him and supporting him. And Dennis Bonnen had a similar thing, right? And so, we come into this session, and I think, in my experience, one of the unique things about this session is that, the Speaker, he's a very conservative guy. I like Dustin Burrows. I would consider him to be a friend. He's a very conservative policymaker. He came into a session where essentially on day one he didn't know if he was going to be the Speaker. That hadn't happened since, to my knowledge, the 1970s, where you had a truly contested Speaker fight all the way to the House floor and you really know who's going to win. So you think about all the things that you have to put in place before you come to the House floor and you start leading staff, policy, all of these directions that you want to go, who your leaders are going to be. Every Speaker I've ever served under up until today has had at least a month before session began to work through all that. And he's literally doing it. He's, it's like, assembling an airplane while riding a bike at the same time, right? I mean, it's literally multitasking at a very high level. Very few people could do that and do that successfully. So I give him a lot of credit. He's made some very difficult choices and really kind of put together, I think, a very good team of folks around him. And so, He's done very well. And I hope that people that are listening to this understand how unique this is and how difficult of a situation this is to find yourself in, where you're having to multitask at this very high level. You're having to run the chamber while at the same time trying to set up the chamber. That's really hard.
And pair that with all the new influx of new members.
And all the new members. And, you still have legislative priorities for our party. You have the governor's emergency action items, which include some pretty big issues that I think we would all agree are unfinished business, like ESAs and school choice.
Right.
And he's managing all that. And I think he deserves a lot of credit for that. That's a lot. Now, to put all that together so quickly.
So much change.
Tremendous change. Tremendous, out with the old, in with the new, right?
Absolutely. And the new members, how are they all handling this? Because usually it's a huge, learning curve for all the new members, but there's so many and so much change.
Yeah.
So how is that going?
I mean, I think new members are always coming in drinking from a fire hose. That's how it was when I did it. I think the House Republican Caucus is doing everything it can to be a resource to those members and to train and equip people to be highly effective for their district. We are, as a caucus, singularly focused right now on getting our legislative priorities from our party accomplished, getting our governor's emergency action items accomplished, and equipping our House Republican colleagues to be able to lead on those issues, making sure they have the resources, making sure that everybody can get to where my hope is that on all these things that we may not always agree on the play calling, but I want everybody to be on the same playbook, right? And to know, this is the bill, this is what we're doing, this is, And so to me, that's good leadership, right? And that's what I want. I want the caucus to be that place. So, I want us to just, right now, we are united in terms of focusing on the policies. That's what everybody's doing. Whether wherever you were on the speaker's race or any of that kind of stuff, that's behind us now. We have work to do. We have priorities to pass. The Senate's off to a head start. They always get the benefit of that. And we have a little catching up to do, which we will, but we need to be focused on our priorities right now, and that's what the caucus is doing.
And what are yours this session? I know 3 months really left.
So there's a couple of things that I'm really laser focused on that I think are really critical, and they're a little bit out of the box for me. One is an insurance bill, but the other one that I'm really excited about is I have a bill that would establish an interim commission, fully operational commission to study the education code and also the federal education requirements from the standpoint of how does this impact teacher job satisfaction and retention of teachers. Because what I hear from classroom teachers, including my wife, is that we keep passing HBs and SBs and we just make teachers' working conditions miserable. And we put a lot of things on them that have nothing to do with actually teaching. There's, reporting requirements and testing requirements and special education requirements and, all these other things. And it makes their job so hard. And it's everything from, my wife just despises this TELPAS program that English language arts teachers do, which is, for kids with English as a second language kind of thing. And it's just government bureaucracy is really what it is. It's fill out the reports, grade the tests, busy work. And meanwhile, your class is over here on pause while you're doing all this stuff for the 1 or 2 students that in your class that might need it. Discipline is an issue, right? Mm-hmm. And some of that is tied up in the codes that we have. There are things, some of which are federal requirements in the special education code that essentially prevent teachers from being able to take disciplinary actions against kids that may even physically assault them. We're talking about a teacher feeling safe in their own classroom.
Wow.
So the problem is the education code is dense, it's complicated, it's like 5,000 pages long, right? You don't just pull a string parachute in the middle of session and say, I'm here to save the day and pull a string and fix that. It's more likely that you're going to pull the wrong piece out of the Jenga puzzle and the whole thing's going to fall over. So what we need to do is create a commission, fund it, let them hire the experts, put some teachers on it, get some members together, give them the entire interim to study the issue, figure out how we can actually improve the working conditions of our classroom teachers so that people actually enjoy their job a little bit more, or a lot bit more, hopefully. And that's my number one bill. And the other one has to do with insurance. Property and casualty rates are really high. And a lot of that has to do with things that are just, quite frankly, completely beyond our control. Inflation is high. Building materials have been scarce. And weather patterns in our state have been such that in the last 5 years, 3 of the most expensive storms from an insurance loss perspective are all here in Central and North Texas. And they were not named storms. They were straight line wind and hail events. Devastating and really expensive. And insurance is just a factor of it's all math, right? Like how much your insurance costs depends on the likelihood of a claim and the severity of a claim, period. And so you can't control the weather. No one's invented a weather machine. We can't control inflation. But what we can control is the severity of the claims from the standpoint of how well is your house built. Is your house built to withstand weather events, or does it, anytime there's hail, your shingles get damaged and you need a new roof? So there are things that we can do to fortify our homes. And I'm not one who likes mandating things. I'm not doing that. But I have a bill that would incentivize the state would create a fund through the Department of Insurance to help subsidize the cost of making some of these structural upgrades to your homestead that makes it more resistant to claims. And what that does is it lowers your cost of insurance right off the bat by about anywhere from 25 to 50%. It increases the value of your home through a certification program by 5 to 10% of your home's total value suddenly increased. Lifetime certificate transferable to the next owner. And it affects the community rating for the entire area. So everybody, even the people that don't undertake resiliency, start to get some relief from their property and casualty rates. Look, we don't want to be like California, where they rate set, and then companies like USAA and State Farm just say, you know what, we're out of here. We're not writing any more policies in the state. That just decreases competition, and it makes it less likely that you're going to have competitive prices. In the California Palisades fire, everyone's talked about that one. I think from what I've read, about 50% of the people have insurance through the state's insurer of last resort because it's not affordable in any other means because they've completely screwed up their insurance market by overregulation. Responding to increases in premium, overregulation, carriers leave the market. You can't make them stay. So then the state's left holding the bag. And basically, who's holding the bag? The taxpayers. So it's another unfunded mandate on the government, and so people's taxes now have to go to pay for other people's property and casualty insurance, and because of a loss, that's just not a good way to solve that problem. So I have a bill that would fix that. Alabama's done it. Florida's doing it. Other states have done it. And it really seems to be having very positive effects and in a market-friendly way.
Exciting. And you have 3 months left to do it.
Yeah.
How do you feel about the biannual legislature?
Oh, I like it.
Yeah.
I mean, as I heard somebody say when I first came into the legislature, I'm glad you guys only meet once every other year because I think you can do less damage that way. I have friends that are in legislatures that meet, 2 years, like every year, right?
Yep.
And usually what they have is like a short cycle and a long cycle. And I mean, I think one of the things, and it gets back to, the House isn't as busy right now and all this kind of stuff. There are so many things in the way that our government is set up in Texas that keep our state free and prosperous by virtue of the fact that it is actually difficult to pass legislation in Texas.
Absolutely. It's meant to be.
It's meant to be, right? And so that's one of the things. Meeting every other year, yeah, you get a lot of bills filed because everybody's got to get it out of their system. And it's a great big funnel and a lot of stuff doesn't make it through. And that keeps our state free, prosperous, and lowering regulatory burden.
Diving a little bit, I know you talked a little bit about the tech in healthcare.
Yeah.
What do you see? Do you see an opportunity for AI to help in this insurance?
Freaking totally. Like, I think the thing that AI is not fully being utilized for anybody that wants to start a startup, just remember you heard it here. The first person that develops a comprehensive AI to help healthcare providers deal with prior authorizations and utilization reviews and automates that system completely, that's a game changer in healthcare industry. Prior authorizations are pretty universally used. It clearly lowers the cost of healthcare delivery from an insurance perspective because it puts a barrier and a delay in the delivery of that care. And, they're not going away. They're burdensome. Most private practices have to have several people that are full-time employees that do nothing but deal with that stuff all day long. That is a major reason that drives consolidation and mergers and acquisitions in our healthcare market space, vertical consolidation, horizontal consolidation, private equity, all that stuff, hospital-owned practices, all that stuff. A lot of that is driven by the complexity of the overhead that is necessary in order to be able to run a medical practice. Whether you're a primary care provider or a neurosurgeon, everybody has to get on the phone with the insurance company and deal with, can I get approved for this? Can my patient get this prescription? It's constant. If you could use AI to actually do that, it would be a game changer.
Very cool.
So I hope somebody's listening to this that will say, oh, yeah, that's great. I'm going to do that.
Me too.
Yeah. That would be a game changer for us.
Very cool.
I think that would actually put downward pressure on the numbers of mergers and acquisitions and horizontal vertical consolidation in healthcare. And I think it would actually lower healthcare costs.
Very cool. Yeah, I hope people are listening.
I hope so.
Business booming in Texas. We need more.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, for sure.
What is kind of your long-term vision for healthcare in Texas, and where do you see being able to change?
Yeah,
there?
so I am a big believer in competition and transparency. As I said earlier, my car analogy, what I really want to see in healthcare is a marketplace of competition. We have an insurance system. I don't think we're going to get rid of that anytime soon because the matter of fact is that our healthcare system in America, although healthcare systems around the world may be cheaper per capita, they don't offer the same level of easy access, high cost, cutting edge treatments and therapies that we have in America. Even in places where you could say, well, like the European countries probably have comparable technology and capability, all of that hyper expensive care is rationed.
I grew up in the UK,
so you know what I'm talking about.
Born under the NHS, yeah.
Exactly. So you know what I'm talking about. So,
Absolutely.
If you're, 75 years old and you want to have a quadruple bypass, that is harder to get. You don't just sort of show up and have that done. It's harder to get that approved than it is if you're 55.
My grandparents have to get private health care because they can't get an appointment quick enough.
So I don't think that we're going to junk the system that we have. I am always frustrated when people use these catchy little phrases like Medicare for all and stuff like that, because I think that's basically a misnomer. We do have single payer health in America. It's called the VA medical system. And I think if you talk to a lot of vets that use it, they will tell you it's great for primary care access and it pretty much sucks for everything else. Mm-hmm. If you have cancer, if you need a hip replacement, if your gallbladder or your hernia is bothering you, I actually worked at the VA one time when they actually ran out of money.
Oh, wow.
Because they operate on a fixed budget annually. So when they run out of money, they basically just shut down all of their outpatient, and day surgery and inpatient stuff. So like they had whole surgical units on the 5th floor, this is in Houston, that they just shut them down and just reassigned everybody. And they just told all the patients like, hey, I know you're supposed to have a hip replacement next week, but better luck next year.
Wow.
We'll wait till we get next year's budget. And it was like that's Medicare for all right there. If you're going to have a one-size-fits-all healthcare system, like a single-payer system, the only lever you have to control cost is rationing care, because there is no competition.
A little medical story from the UK. So Christmas one year, my brother got some steak stuck in his throat. So we go to the ER in the UK, and the doctor comes out and says, do you have 50 pence for the vending machine? And we said, sure. So he said, okay, get a Coke. And we said, okay, and we paid for the Coke. And he said, okay, drink this. And that was what was supposed to just launch it. It actually did, but that was like,
as an anesthesiologist, I'm horrified because I'm thinking about all the aspiration risk So I will tell you not a funny story, but an interesting story. Just a scary story, maybe a little bit for some of the listeners out there. But one time I got called in the middle of the night for an impaction type food kind of bolusy thing or whatever. And we went in there, and it wasn't actually a food bolus that was causing the pain and the spasms and all that kind of stuff. It was a single bristle from a wire grill brush.
Oh, no.
And we were actually watching it on camera like a sewing needle going in and out of the tissue.
Oh, wow.
And it was painful. Just stuck crossways in the esophagus.
That sounds terrible.
And it came off of, it was a grilled steak, right? And it was like that got stuck on the grill and it came off on the steak and the person ate it. And so never, ever, ever use a wire brush to clean your grill. Or you too
I never
might,
will now. That is
you too might end
crazy.
up that way. Yeah. It was, and we were just literally watching it on video. And like I said, it was like literally like watching a sewing needle on a machine, because it was just poke, poke, poke. Every time there was a movement of the tissues, it's just, going right into the tissue.
That sounds so painful.
And we pulled it out, and it was like that big. Not big at all,
That's pretty cool. So, with the Make America Healthy Again campaign, I know you've got a lot of thoughts on healthcare. What are your thoughts on that?
I could not be more excited about RFK Jr. being our Health and Human Services Secretary. I am not a Democrat. I have never voted Democrat in my life, with the exception that there was one judge one time, and I had actually served on a jury on his bench in his courtroom. And so I knew him, and I had a lot of respect for him. So I might have voted for him that one time. But I am super excited about RFK Jr. He says a lot of the things to me that need to be said. When I was a medical student, I went to the best medical school in the state, hands down, everybody's top list. I got 1 hour of nutrition in 4 years.
I brought this up the other day. I've had a lot of physicians.
Well, I have a bill for that.
Oh, what is it?
So I filed a very straightforward bill that basically would require every medical student going to a publicly funded medical school in this state to have a minimum of 1 semester of clinical nutrition, and the curriculum may not be written by or influenced by a pharmaceutical manufacturer or a food and beverage company.
Wow.
And it has to talk about normal dietary concerns, disease states where diet becomes important, common additives and toxins that can be introduced into our food supply, as well as some of the ideas that are coming out now about mitochondrial health and energy levels and things like that. There's a whole frontier of medicine out there that has to do with wellness. And I say it's a frontier only because the the American medical community, for the most part, has not really embraced it. We're still stuck in the whole issue of you have diabetes, you take the $1,000 a month pill. You know, you're obese, there's a drug for that. I have a good friend who's a plastic surgeon in the Woodlands area, and he always would tell me, he says, you know what the real secret to weight loss is? I was like, no. He goes, it's more tricep and less bicep. And I would say, well, what does that mean, doc? And he'd be like, push away from the table and stop bringing the spoon to your mouth.
Sure.
And I'm like, well, you can always count on a plastic surgeon to lift you up.
That's funny.
And he's like, ha, ha, ha. Right. But I mean, it's like, yeah. So diet and nutrition and so much of chronic disease is really all about choices that you make over the course of your life that lead you to that decision. And something that I've been campaigning on for years, another bill idea, this one I filed before, but food is medicine.
That is, yeah.
And the kind of food that you eat and the kind of food that you have access to eating will largely determine the state of your health, not just in the immediacy, but moving forward as well. I mean, we have problems with things like, maternal mortality, for example, is a good one to look at. A lot of maternal mortality is tied up in poorly managed chronic disease, obesity, diabetes, high blood pressure. These conditions that all impact maternal mortality are directly tied to diet.
It's so much lifestyle.
Yes, and yet we have all of these patients who are on state assistance because of their socioeconomic status. They're poor, right? They have poor access to health care and they don't have a lot of resources, so we put them on Medicaid. Okay, great. I'm glad we have a safety net program that provides for pregnant women. I'm a pro-life guy. I think pregnant women should have access to health care. Not abortions, but health care. And so you're managing this chronic disease and you're worried about the health of the mom and the baby, and yet you're not addressing any of the dietary issues. And so part of that is, and this freaks out conservatives when I say it's like one of those dirty words you can't say, like, he said it, but I'm going to say it. There are social determinants of health. Mm. There are people in this state, especially those who are on public assistance from a healthcare standpoint or covered by state health benefits, Medicaid, CHIP, that live in a community where they don't have access to good nutrition.
Food deserts are real.
Food deserts are real. I don't care what anybody says. I've seen it firsthand. I know it's real. And look, you can't be arguing out one side of your mouth that we're all maha this, happy about maha, woohoo. But I'm perfectly okay with a pregnant mom who basically has access to McDonald's and a convenience store as a source of nutrition. That is not going to lead to a good outcome. So instead of paying for all these $1 million cures, why aren't we providing nutrition? Why aren't we helping people learn how to prepare food in a healthy way? Why aren't we, is it cheaper to provide groceries or pay for Ozempic?
And I listen to a lot of podcasts on this, so I could go on all day about this.
Yeah, this is a huge thing. So food is medicine is big. It's very bipartisan. I'm very proud to say that there's a Democrat senator. His name's Nathan Johnson, right? Senator Johnson. Incredibly intelligent man. We don't always agree on policy, but when we agree on policy, I love working with the guy. He's one of the smartest guys in the room. And so he and I are going to give it another shot.
Great.
And we're going to try to get food as medicine down again. But yeah, there's so many things that we need to do. Brian Harrison and I at one point, a session ago, were talking about, like, why do we need the FDA? Why, the FDA is so corrupt and so crooked. Their only real success was in the 1960s with thalidomide. And everything since then has been mediocre at best. And there's a lot of corruption there. A lot of people work in the agency and then go work for the pharmaceutical industry. And, they literally, the FDA creates supply chain shortages by virtue of the fact that they shut down supply because they find something they don't like, because they only allow a certain number of licenses, because, all this stuff. I mean, pharmaceutical precursors manufactured in nations that don't like us very much, like China.
How do you feel?
So we wanted to create a Texas Drug Administration and just cut the feds out entirely and just say, look, Texas doesn't need the federal government to regulate food and medicines. Let Texas run Texas. Senator Creighton used to say that all the time, let Texas run Texas, right?
It's a good saying. How do you feel about the food pyramid?
I don't know that the food pyramid's accurate.
It's totally not.
Right? And
yeah.
the stuff that I'm reading, and again, look, I don't want you to think of me as an expert on this, because I'm not. By self-admission, as a doctor, I was never taught nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what I don't know. I'm learning just like the rest of you. But I'm telling you, I've been doing some reading. I've looked at some of the studies that are out there looking at mitochondrial health and how that impacts chronic disease and how we essentially overfeed ourselves chronically. And that leads to chronic disease. And so, I really think we need to be talking about these things. This needs to be part of our core curriculum, and our medical practitioners need to be educated on the importance of nutrition as a means of preventing chronic disease and not just waiting until people get really, really sick.
Well, most processed foods are just poison, and anything we do is just poisoning ourselves.
And then you get to like the food. So I have an uncle. He's gone to be with the Lord, but he was a farmer in Minnesota my whole life. Growing up, we'd go see Uncle Bill and Aunt Mary, and get to ride on tractors. And he grew soybeans and corn, like a lot of Minnesota farmers, right? But he would always say to me, he's like, Monsanto is literally going to kill everybody in this country. He's like, with their genetically modified organisms and spraying everything with Roundup and all this stuff, he's like, this is just terrible. He's like, and they're increasing yields left and right, and everybody's happy because there's more grain in the bin and people are getting paid more. He's like, but they're poisoning us.
I don't eat corn anymore.
And he was saying this in the mid-'80s.
Mm. That's crazy.
So now here we are, 40 years later, and it's like the chickens really have come home to roost. So I hope we ban all of those chemicals on our food products. I hope we ban all GMOs. I hope we go back, RFK Jr. introduced some very interesting ideas about, incentivizing these regenerative farms. I think that's what they call them, right? And they're talking about bringing back small farming. And that's the other thing my uncle used to say all the time. He's like, commercial farming is literally killing us. Like, it's literally putting us all out of business. It used to be a farm was 200 acres, 300 acres, and they were all family farms. And now they're like massive corporations, and they're farming like 5,000, 10,000 acres at a time. And like that's part of the problem with our food supply.
Absolutely. And not everyone has the luxury to eat local necessarily if they're not around it. And
look, the last thing I'm going to say is the vaccine issue has to be looked at too. I think COVID kind of really put a exclamation point on this, but the VAR system is an unmitigated disaster. There's no reason why just because you make a vaccine, you should be immune from liability. And I'm not anti-vaccine. I don't want to come across as saying I think all vaccines are bad. Polio was a very debilitating disease when it was common, right? There are things that we have done with vaccinations that have decreased mortality overall that are beneficial. But I don't understand this whole business of trying to protect people from liability for their products. I do think that people have also been injured, and I don't think we've actually done a very good job of acknowledging that. And, I can't remember her name, but in everybody in your podcast that's a tech person knows who I'm talking about. But RFK's vice presidential nominee, she comes from Silicon Valley. I think she was married to one of the Google founders for a while.
Okay.
I can't remember her name, but I heard her speak.
I can't remember.
And it was brilliant. And she was talking about how her child had all these vaccinations, and she's like, when you're a mother, you just know. And she's like, literally a day later, everything had changed. And she's like, the worst thing about it is the fact that, like, because of my social circle and how everybody was so pro-vaccine, like, I was shamed into not even being able to consider the possibility in the process of working through my grief as my child's growing up with autism, or I can't remember I think that's what she said, but it was like clearly her child had some severe consequences. She's like, I was forbidden from even considering the possibility that maybe it was related to the fact that they got all these vaccines on one day.
They used to be spread out.
I know, and so it's like we need to be having these conversations.
Absolutely.
And it is, and I'm going to tell you something I strongly believe, and that is that science isn't afraid to be challenged. Real science and real scientists don't care about the political implications of their work, because science is only about the relentless pursuit of the truth through rigorous and unbiased observation and repeated study alone leading to the same conclusions is the only thing that moves a hypothesis to a theorem. The reason we know gravity is gravity is because you can test it and I can test it and we can get the same result. And so science is not afraid to be challenged. And there are far too many people in the scientific space, particularly with regard to food, medicine, and vaccinations, who are deathly afraid of having their work challenged. And that is unscientific.
Well, you are a very busy man, but I hear a rumor that you play guitar as well.
I have been known to dabble. I will say, so two things about my guitar playing is that, number one, I'm not very good. And number two, I'm left-handed. So all my guitar, and I don't play the Hendrix way where I play upside down and backwards on a restrung right-handed guitar. I actually go out and buy left-handed guitars, and they're harder to come by and very expensive, but I will say, as a shout out to them, because I really think very highly of them, there is a guitar store in my area in Bel Air called Southpaw Guitars, and it is exclusively a left-handed guitar store.
In your district, that's so handy.
It's not in my district, but it's very close, and it's so I have been a loyal customer there, so you can get a left-handed guitar if you're a left-handed guitar player. I like grunge.
Really?
I'm a kid of the 80s, so I was starting college in 1990.
Cool. And
so I was there, when Nirvana's Nevermind album came out, and Alice in Chains is one of my all-time favorite bands. I think Jerry Cantrell is such a great guitarist. And of course, Red Hot Chili Peppers I really like, John Frusciante. And, that is really my genre.
Do you play in a band?
I don't play in a band. Now, my son, my middle child, Logan, is a very accomplished musician. And that kid can just hear it one time, pick it up. And he's a bit, he's a bit like the David Crowder. I don't know if you know David Crowder. Okay. So David Crowder has this amazing musical talent where he's like, from what I've heard, he can just pick up an instrument and just start playing it, And my son Logan is one of these kids where it's just like, he's not met a musical instrument that he can't just sit down and teach himself to play.
Oh, that's impressive.
So for Christmas, he asked for a banjo.
Cool.
So we got all kinds of, bluegrass and hillbilly stuff going on up in his room upstairs now, because it's, all of a sudden it's about the banjo. And I'm like, why do you want to learn to play the banjo? And he's like, well, because I don't have a banjo.
Good for him.
Just, so that's the new thing right now. So he's actually very good.
That's very fun.
But yes, I have a guitar in my office. I think music is very soothing. And so I have been known to sort of collect my thoughts and think about how I'm going to lay this bill out on the House floor while trying to strum a few bars from, Interstate Love Song or Plush by Stone Temple Pilots or Rooster by Alice in Chains.
Well, we're all trapped in the Capitol late one night. We'll bring the team by to hopefully hear you play some tunes.
Maybe.
That sounds good.
Yeah.
So where can your constituents kind of keep up with all your legislative updates and everything you're working on?
So we try to be pretty active on social media. We send out newsletters, and we have, Facebook and all those kind of things. And, we'll try to keep everybody updated on the bills that we're working and filing. I talked about the top two, but we're kind of known as being one of those workhorse type offices where we carry a lot of bills and we pass a lot of stuff. So hopefully that'll continue this session and we'll get a lot of things done. But I really hope on behalf of all my teacher constituents and friends, I want to pass that bill in the worst way. I mean, we talk about doing all this stuff for schools. We just need a bill that is really singularly focused on making teachers' lives better.
That's very
working
handy
conditions
that
better.
you have your wife can tell you firsthand experiences too. It's great.
She can. So.
Well, it's been a pleasure having you on,
good stuff to talk about today.
Yeah,
huh?
what? Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Yeah, I just really appreciate the opportunity to be on, and I think I know everyone's like, slow start and all this kind of stuff, but there's still a lot of session left to go. A lot can happen in 100 days. And don't kid yourself, the House is going to pass a lot of really good bills this session. A lot of, I do believe we're going to walk out of here and all of our legislative priorities will be completed. And we'll have a very good conservative session. I do think our speaker is a very conservative leader. He's the guy that basically passed the Death Star bill. Everybody forgets that he's the guy that, said no more silly local ordinances to ban this, that, and the other crazy stuff. We're going to have some regulatory consistency. Huge undertaking, pulled it off. The Death Star is alive and well. So I think we're going to get good things done. And from what I've heard, he and the lieutenant governor are having conversations, working together. That was the other thing during the speaker's race that was really important to me is you can't have the leadership between the two chambers constantly fighting and not willing to talk and meet and discuss. And I think our current speaker is, from what I understand, is he's off to a good start with
civility.
There's conversations, there's policy discussions, and so I hope that continues, and I hope that that bears fruit. And I believe it will.
Well, that's good to hear. Optimistic end there. So thank you again for coming on.
You're welcome.
Everyone listening, make sure to subscribe.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.